The old mining moon turned slowly under the light of a pale distant star, its surface scarred by craters and deep blackened trenches left by battles. Long-forgotten winds carried fine dust across the barren plains, whispering against jagged rocks and shattered metal husks that had once been proud ships and outposts. The silence was heavy, only broken by the faint hum of a lone human cargo hauler resting in a shallow canyon. The man who owned it, Daniel, moved carefully through the remains of a half-buried alien facility, his boots crunching on shards of glass and scorched plating. He was not here for history. He was here for survival. Scavenging was how he kept his ship flying, and his stomach full. Every bolt or scrap of working tech could mean another week alive in the cold emptiness between stars inside. The ruin, it was dark except for the weak light from the lamp strapped to his chest walls. Curved, strangely alien architecture that felt more like the inside of a living thing than a building. Organic patterns ran along the corridors, and his steps echoed in the emptiness. He passed collapsed doors and twisted beams, searching for anything he could strip out. Then he heard it, a faint sound almost lost under the shifting dust, a small noise somewhere between a growl and a whimper. It made him stop and hold his breath. He waited, thinking it might be a trap. Scavengers who let their guard down in old battle sites often ended up as nothing but bones. The sound came again, softer this time, and it pulled at something deep inside him. Moving slowly, he followed it deeper into the broken structure until he came to a chamber where the roof had caved in. Moonlight spilling through the cracks, metal and stone lay scattered like the bones of a giant in the corner. Under a half-collapsed wall, he saw movement, a small shape pressed against the rubble, its sides rising and falling in quick, shallow breaths. Daniel's first thought was that it was some kind of alien varmint scavenging for scraps, but as he drew closer, he saw the truth. It was a young predator cub, though nothing like the creatures he knew from human worlds. It had the sleek shape of a hunting cat, but its body was covered in dark, iridescent scales that caught the faint light and shimmered. Its eyes were large, bright gold, with vertical slits that seemed far too intelligent for a mere animal. Two small tusk-like fangs curled from its jaw, and a ridge of fine quills ran along its spine. It looked both fierce and fragile at the same time, and Daniel could see blood matting the scales near one of its hind legs. A makeshift trap of twisted wire had cut deep. He crouched a few meters away, watching it. The cub gave a low, warning growl, but it was weak, almost pitiful. Its tail curled tight against its body. Daniel had seen many dangerous things in his years out here, but something in this moment was different. This creature was fighting to stay alive, and no one else was coming for it. He knew the smart thing would be to leave. Alien predators could be unpredictable and deadly, even young ones, but he could not turn away, not this time. He spoke softly, letting his voice carry no threat, moving inch by inch until he was close enough to see the trap clearly. His hands worked quickly, pulling a small cutter from his belt. The wire gave way. With a snap, the cub flinched but did not strike. Instead, it watched him with those strange golden eyes, almost as if it understood that he was helping. Once free, it tried to stand, but its leg gave out, and it collapsed against the cold metal floor. Daniel took a slow breath, then reached forward, lifting it gently into his arms. It was lighter than he expected, its body warm against the chill air, and he could feel the rapid beat of its heart against his chest. Carrying it back through the ruin was not easy. He had to keep one hand free for his weapon, just in case. But no danger came, only the endless quiet of the dead moon. His ship's ramp lowered with a hiss when he approached, and he stepped inside, sealing the hatch behind him. The smell of oil and metal filled the small cabin, but it felt like safety. He laid the cub on a padded crate and fetched the medkit from the wall. He cleaned the wound as best as he could. The cub tensed but did not resist his touch. Instead, it kept those eyes fixed on him as though memorizing his face. When he was done, he gave it a little water from his canteen and wrapped it in a thermal blanket. It curled into the warmth, making a soft chuffing sound that he decided was a sign of contentment. Daniel leaned back in the chair beside it, looking at this strange little survivor and wondering what kind of world it came from. He had never seen anything like it in any of the trade logs or xenobiology files. But he knew one thing for certain: he was not leaving it here to die. The stars were dangerous enough without adding abandonment to the list of threats as his ship lifted from the canyon floor, and the dead moon fell away behind them. Daniel felt the first spark of something he had not felt in years: purpose. It was a small thing, fragile and perhaps foolish, but it burned in his chest just the same. The cub slept through the ascent, breathing slow and even as the stars spread out before them, neither of them knowing that their paths had just shifted towards something far greater and far more dangerous than either could imagine. First hours after leaving the moon were quiet, except for the low hum of the ship's engines and the faint hiss of recycled air. Daniel kept glancing at the cub resting on the crate, its body wrapped in the thermal blanket, its golden eyes opening now and then to follow his movements. He knew most wild creatures would have tried to escape or lash out, but this one only watched him with a calm curiosity, as if measuring his intent. When he approached with a small bowl of water, the cub sniffed it cautiously, then drank in slow, measured laps before lying down again, its tail curling over its paws. Days passed in the deep stretch of space, Daniel falling into the old rhythm of long hauls, checking systems, running scans, eating simple rations. The cub began to wander the cabin, limping at first but growing surer with each step. It explored every corner of the small ship, sniffing storage lockers, tapping panels with its claw tips, and sometimes perching on the back of the co-pilot seat to watch the stars slide past outside the cockpit window. It seemed drawn to the light trails left by distant ships and the slow turning of nebula clouds far away. Daniel found himself talking to it without thinking, telling it about the different sectors he had traveled, the strange worlds he had seen, and the people he had met. The cub would tilt its head at the sound of his voice, as though trying to understand. One night during his shift at the controls, the ship's SCI spoke in its calm, neutral tone, stating that the lifeform he had brought aboard carried unusual biosignatures not matching any registered fauna in human or allied databases. Daniel frowned and asked for details. The AI explained that the readings indicated highly adapted musculature, dense bone structure, and an energy pattern uncommon in non-sapient creatures. There was even faint evidence of genetic modification. Daniel leaned back considering this. The cub had shown intelligence beyond instinct, its eyes tracking him with almost human focus, yet it still behaved like an animal seeking warmth, food, and trust. Meanwhile, far from his path in the jewel-like capital of the Cathari Dominion, the Empress sat in her private chamber, the great halls outside filled with the low murmur of court politics and the silent presence of armored guards. She held in her hand a small metal token, engraved with the image of a creature sleek and proud with golden eyes. She had kept it close since the day her beloved companion vanished during an attack on one of her transport ships. It had been more than a pet. It had been bred from ancient royal bloodlines, a living emblem of her reign and the bond between ruler and world. The loss had been a silent wound she showed no one in the outer world's bounty. Notices moved quietly through shadow channels, no public postings, no official orders. Yet word spread among mercenaries, smugglers, and hunters that anyone who came across a small predator with golden eyes would find great reward if they brought it to the right hands. These whispers were always followed by warnings that those hands belonged to people whose loyalty to the Empress was absolute and whose patience was short. Daniel knew nothing of these whispers. His focus stayed on repairing an old thruster array salvaged from his last job, while the cub watched from a nearby crate, its head moving with each clink of his tools. When he finished and wiped the sweat from his brow, he tossed a small length of cord toward it. The cub pounced with surprising speed, catching it between its claws and gnawing at it with playful growls. Daniel laughed, shaking his head, and for a moment forgetting the emptiness outside the hull. The bond between them grew in small moments, the cub curling at the foot of his bunk, during sleep cycles, following him through narrow maintenance tunnels, and even mimicking his movements. During stretching exercises, once when a loose panel shifted unexpectedly and nearly caught his hand, the cub sprang forward, hissing at the inanimate threat as though it had life. Daniel reached down, stroking the ridge of quills along its spine, feeling the low rumble of its contentment, and thinking how strange it was to feel safer with this alien predator nearby. Still, the unease from the AI's scan results lingered. He began to wonder what kind of world had produced such a creature, and why it seemed so unafraid of him. Perhaps someone had trained it before. Perhaps it had belonged to a crew now gone lost in the black. He considered the possibility that its family might be searching for it, though that thought stirred something unpleasant in him. The idea of parting with it felt heavier than it should. During a routine stop at a small neutral way station, Daniel left the cub secured in the cabin while he traded spare parts for food and fuel. The station was quiet, a scattering of travelers and traders moving between dimly lit stalls, but he noticed two tall reptilian aliens pause mid-conversation when he passed, their eyes following him too closely. Later, as he loaded supplies back into his ship, he thought he saw one of them watching from the docking bay shadows, their posture tense as though waiting for something. He sealed the hatch quickly and ran a system check, but found nothing amiss when he returned to the cockpit. The cub was perched on the console, staring intently at the docking bay cameras, its quills slightly raised. Daniel reached for it, but it stepped to the side, giving a soft sound almost like a warning. He decided to leave quickly, engines powering up and the station fading into the black behind them. He told himself it was just his imagination, yet in the quiet of the next shift cycle he caught himself checking the long-range sensors more often than usual. Stars outside were vast and indifferent, but inside that small ship a silent understanding was forming between man and creature, one born from shared survival and unspoken trust. Neither of them knew that somewhere across the sector, the first hints of pursuit had already begun, and the bond they were building was about to be tested in ways neither could yet imagine. The long reach of open space stretched before them, a quiet road of lightless distance broken only by the cold gleam of stars. Daniel had grown used to the steady hum of the ship and the soft shifting noises the cub made as it moved through the cabin, but now there was a different kind of weight in the air, a subtle pressure that made him check the sensors more than usual and glance twice at the faint blips of distant ships in the outer ranges. They were far enough away not to be a direct threat, but he had been in space long enough to know that some ships like to linger just out of range, waiting for the right moment to close in. It started with small signs, a few odd pings on his comm system, untraceable signals that carried no message, just bursts of static, a minor interference in the navigation array that corrected itself without his input. The AI reported no critical faults, but Daniel knew the feeling of being watched. The cub seemed to feel it too, its golden eyes often fixed on the viewing ports, its quills slightly raised when the sensors picked up another passing vessel, when they stopped at a larger trade hub to sell salvaged scrap. Daniel kept the cub hidden in a storage compartment padded with blankets. He did not want curious eyes on it. While he was among strangers, the hub was busy with traders and haulers from a dozen worlds, neon lights reflecting off worn metal floors, and the air thick with the smell of engine grease and unfamiliar spices. As he moved between stalls exchanging parts for food cartridges, he noticed a group of armed aliens gathered near the far entrance. They were broad-shouldered, with mottled gray skin and long-clawed fingers, their eyes pale and cold as they scanned the crowd. One of them locked eyes with him, and for a moment, Daniel's hand moved instinctively toward the sidearm under his coat. He forced himself to look away and continue his trade as if nothing was wrong, but when he glanced back, the alien was still watching, his gaze sliding toward the docking bay corridors. Daniel kept his pace steady, not wanting to show urgency, yet every step back toward his ship felt like it was carrying him across open ground toward waiting danger. When he reached the hatch, the cub was sitting upright, Inside, ears pricked and muscles tense as if it sensed what was outside. Daniel closed the hatch quickly and told the AI to run a proximity scan. The results came back showing the armed group moving slowly through the docking level, their path bringing them closer to his bay. His gut told him they were not here for a friendly visit. Without waiting for them to close the gap, he fired the engines and pulled away from the station, ignoring the sharp calls from dock control over the com as he slipped into the shadow of a drifting asteroid field. They pursue him, 2 ships breaking away from the station to follow his trail. They were faster but less maneuverable, and the cover of the asteroid field gave him a chance, weaving through massive spinning rocks that glinted in the pale light of a distant sun. Daniel pushed the ship harder than he liked, warning alarms flaring as the hull scraped against passing debris. The cub clung to the back of his seat, its claws digging into the worn fabric, but making no sound, only watching the flashing lights with sharp, focused eyes. A sudden burst of plasma fire lit the void behind them, glancing off an asteroid and showering his rear shields with fragments. Daniel swore under his breath, forcing the ship into a narrow gap between 2 massive stones. His pursuers followed, one close enough that he could see the markings on its hull. They were bounty hunters for certain, the kind who did not bother asking questions before taking their prize. The chase lasted long minutes until Daniel spotted an opening in the field, a tunnel of rock that led to open space. He timed his burst of speed perfectly, the ship surging forward and out into the clear black beyond the hunters, followed. But in their rush, one clipped the tunnel wall, sending their craft spinning into the asteroid dust field. The second hesitated and lost distance by the time they emerged. Daniel had pushed the engines to full burn and slipped out of their sensor range. Only when the stars settled back into their calm, endless watch did Daniel let out a breath. He had not realized he was holding the cub, eased its grip on the seat, and moved to sit beside him, its head resting against his arm in silent trust. He looked down at it and felt a strange mix of pride and worry. It was no longer just an injured stray. It was something worth chasing across the stars, and that meant his life was no longer simple. Later, as he ran system checks, the AI delivered a quiet report stating that the interference on their comms had not been random. The pattern matched encrypted tracking pulses used by high-level Dominion agents. Daniel sat back, absorbing that news. It was no coincidence strangers were finding him this quickly, he thought. Again of the wounded mercenary who had whispered the Empress's name before dying, and the pieces began to fit together, though he still did not know why the creature was so important to them. He understood enough to realize that returning to the outer stations would only draw more hunters. That night, if such a thing could be called night in deep space. Daniel sat in the cockpit with the stars sprawling before him, and the cub curled in the co-pilot's seat, its breathing steady and calm. He thought about his options. He could keep running hide in fringe systems until the trail went cold, or he could take a different path. One far more dangerous, but perhaps the only one that would end the chase for good. The Empress herself. If she wanted this creature, she would have to hear from him directly, and if she wanted him dead, she could try face to face. Said nothing aloud, but the cub lifted its head and met his eyes, as if sensing the change in his resolve. Outside, the stars kept their cold, silent watch, unaware that one small ship was now carrying the beginning of something far larger than a simple rescue from an abandoned ruin, and the hunt was only just beginning. The decision once made seemed to settle deep inside Daniel, like a weight that could not be shifted. It was not the easy path, and it was not the safe one. But he knew the hunt would never end while he kept running. The bounty hunters would keep coming, the strange encrypted signals would keep following, and sooner or later someone faster or luckier would catch him and take the cub away. So he plotted a course toward the heart of the Cathari Dominion, the very center of the Empress's reach, a place most free traders avoided unless they had business backed by heavy contracts or powerful friends, neither of which he had. The first days on that course were restless, the ship gliding through dark stretches between systems where stars felt cold and far away. Daniel kept the cub close, letting it wander, the cockpit while he worked on engine tuning and weapon calibration. The AI confirmed a faint but steady tracking signal still echoing in their vicinity, though distant enough not to be an immediate threat. He imagined those bounty ships somewhere behind, weaving through the same void, always searching, always closing the gap. The cub seemed to sense the invisible chase, its movements, more alert, its golden eyes scanning the viewing ports and sometimes turning toward the rear of the ship as if trying to see through the metal walls. Crossing into Dominion border space was like stepping into another world. The stars grew brighter here, not because they shone any differently, but because the regions were filled with massive stations and traffic lanes glittering with the movement of thousands of ships. Patrol craft cruised the routes, their hulls marked with the black and gold sigil of the Empress. Every channel was alive with coded signals and navigation orders. The AI advised caution, but Daniel kept the course steady, slipping into the crowded lanes where hunters would have to think twice before attacking. At one refueling point in the sprawling orbital hub, Daniel caught the attention of a pair of Dominion officers there, silver armor reflecting the glow of the docking lights. One of them glanced at the crate in the corner, where the cub lay half hidden by a folded blanket, and though Daniel tried to move between them and the view, he felt the officer's eyes linger a second too long. They asked him routine questions about his cargo and travel plans, and he gave them answers as plain as he could until they moved on. Yet, even after they left, his skin prickled with the feeling that they had guessed more than they had said. Deeper they went into Dominion territory, the more the cub stayed at his side. It no longer explored the ship as freely, preferring to remain within arm's reach. When Daniel slept, it curled beside the bunk. When he worked on repairs, it settled on the deck nearby, watching him with that silent, steady gaze. Once during a maintenance stop in a remote docking ring, a shadow moved at the edge of the bay, and without warning the cub sprang forward, hissing and baring its small fangs. Daniel spun with his weapon ready, but saw nothing except the flicker of movement disappearing into a service tunnel. Whatever had been there was gone, yet the message was clear. Danger was never far. Closer they drew to the capital. The heavier the traffic became, ships of every size moving in intricate patterns guided by unseen traffic control. Field's massive dreadnoughts slid past like drifting fortresses, their weapons silent but ready. Daniel felt small in their shadow, but he pressed on, following the coordinates the eye had drawn from public channels that would bring them to the palace. World. One evening cycle, while they were passing through a narrow trade corridor, the sensors lit with proximity alerts, 3 ships emerging from hyperspace behind them, their transponders masked. Daniel recognized the shape of the lead vessel, a hunter ship he had seen once before on the fringe worlds, its captain known for taking contracts. Others refused without hesitation. He pushed the engines hard, weaving through civilian traffic, but the hunters followed, ignoring standard lanes. The cub growled low at the sound of the alert klaxon, its quills lifting as if ready for a fight. Daniel angled toward a cluster of defense platforms, their shields casting faint blue arcs into space. The hunters hesitated at the edge of that range, unwilling to provoke the Dominion's own guns. Daniel used the pause to slip away into a maintenance lane meant for service craft, not long haulers. It was a tight squeeze, scraping paint from the hull as he forced the ship through, but it broke line of sight, and when they emerged into open space again, the hunters were gone. That night he sat in the cockpit with the cub resting against his arm, the glow from the starfields painting its scales and shifting colors. He thought about the moment they would reach the palace world, and what would follow. There was no promise the Empress would see his act as a kindness. For all he knew, she might think he had stolen her creature for profit and bring her full wrath down on him. Yet the alternative of handing the cub to bounty hunters was unthinkable. It had saved his life more than once. It had stayed beside him without fear, and he owed it more than a quiet handoff in some shadow portas. They made their final jump toward the system that held the Empress's seat of power. Daniel felt a calm settle over him. The decision was past now, only action remained. The cub stirred as the jump ended. its eyes bright as if it too knew they had reached the turning point of their journey. Outside the viewport, the palace world came into view, a vast sphere of green oceans and glittering cities wrapped in rings of defense stations and shipyards. The heart of the Dominion beating strong and silent under the watch of the Empress herself, and soon they would be there. At her gates, the approach to the palace world was unlike any landing Daniel had ever made. Space around the planet shimmered with layered defense grids, each ring of stations connected by invisible energy webs that glowed faintly under the light of the system's twin suns. Countless ships moved in perfect formation, patrol craft sliding past like silent predators, their golden and black hulls gleaming. Daniel kept his course steady, his hands firm on the controls as the AI sent landing requests through the secure Dominion channels. It took only minutes for a reply to come, not in the form of a verbal clearance, but as an escort of 4 sleek guard ships rising from the nearest station to fall into formation around him. Their presence made it clear there would be no turning away now. The Cub stood on the co-pilot seat, its quills lying flat, its eyes fixed on the planet growing larger in the viewport. Daniel could feel a strange energy in the way it held itself, as if it knew this was the end of their journey, and perhaps the beginning of something else. The escort guided him down through the atmosphere, past towering cloud banks, until the city appeared below, sprawling along the edge of a vast inland sea, its buildings curved and gleaming in colors that shifted like liquid metal. The palace itself rose at the heart of it all, a fortress of light and shadow built in tiers that climbed toward the sky, each level guarded by walls that seemed more ceremonial than practical. As if daring anyone to test them, Daniel's ship settled on a landing pad of polished stone and metal. A team of palace guards in ceremonial armor approached, their faces hidden behind mirrored visors, their movements precise and silent. He kept his hands visible as he lowered the ramp. The Cub walked beside him, tail raised head high, as though it had never been injured, never been abandoned. The guards did not speak, but formed a path leading into the palace's great hall. The air inside was cool, scented faintly with something sweet, the walls alive with shifting patterns of light that seemed to tell stories older than the hall itself. At the far end, on a raised dais, sat the Empress, her figure tall and still, her robes flowing like water over the throne, her eyes fixed on them as they entered. Daniel felt the weight of that gaze, sharp and unyielding, yet beneath it there was something else, something that flickered when the Cub stepped forward and gave a soft chuffing sound that echoed in the vaulted chamber. Without hesitation, it bounded up the steps and pressed itself against her legs. She knelt with a grace that seemed impossible for someone of such presence, and gathered the creature into her arms, her fingers moving gently over its scales, her voice low and soft in a language Daniel did not understand, but whose meaning was clear. This was not just a ruler reclaiming a possession. This was a reunion between two beings who had been torn apart and had found each other again. For a long moment, the Empress said nothing. She simply held the Cub, letting it nuzzle against her, before finally turning her gaze back to Daniel. The hall was silent, the guards unmoving, the only sound the faint rustle of her robes. As she rose, she descended the steps with the Cub still in her arms, stopping a few paces from him. Her voice, when it came, was calm, yet carried the weight of command. She spoke of the night the Cub had been taken, of the loss that had been kept from public eyes to prevent unrest. She spoke of the countless searches that had failed to find it, and of the whispers that finally reached her about a lone human traveling with a creature matching its description. Daniel listened, saying nothing, until she asked him why he had brought it back when he could have sold it to hunters for a fortune. He told her simply that it had needed help, and he could not leave it to die. He told her about the ruins, the trap, the chase across systems, the hunters that had closed in again and again. He spoke plainly, without embellishment, and when he was done, the Empress regarded him for a moment longer before nodding once. She declared before the hall that Daniel had acted with honor, that he had returned not just a symbol of her reign, but a part of her life that could never be replaced, as a mark of her gratitude. She offered him Safe passage through all Dominion space free of tariffs and patrol interference, a privilege given to only a handful. Beyond her own fleets, she also named him Protector of the Imperial Fang, a title that carried both respect and quiet warning to those who might think to cross him. Daniel accepted with a slight bow, knowing the title was more than ceremonial. It was a shield against the kind of dangers he had faced on the journey. Here the Empress stepped aside, allowing him to leave without further formality. The cub watched him as he turned to go, its eyes bright, its head tilting in a way he had come to know. Before it gave a low rumble, not of warning but of farewell. He felt something twist in his chest, but he did not look back until he reached the ramp of his ship, where from the palace steps he could still see the golden glint of its eyes watching. Departure was quiet, the escort ships guiding him back into the flow of orbital traffic before breaking away, leaving him to chart his own course once more as the palace world shrank behind him. Daniel sat in the cockpit, his hands light on the controls. The stars ahead endless and open. He thought of the cub now safe in the care of the one who loved it most, and of the strange path that had carried him from the dead silence of a forgotten moon to the throne room of the most powerful ruler in this part of the galaxy. He had no idea where he would go next, only that the universe was vast and filled with both danger and moments worth risking everything. For the hum of the engines filled the cabin and the AI awaited his next destination. But for the first time in a long while, Daniel did not feel like a man drifting without purpose. He had faced the kind of odds that broke most and walked away with his life and his honor intact. Somewhere in the cold expanse between the stars, that was enough. And so he set a new course, letting the black carry him forward into whatever came next. The end.